Question 1 of the 2007 Animal and Plant paper. Weta are nocturnal insects that emerge from holes in trees or from under bark soon after sunset to forage for several hours on plant and animal material. They return to their resting place before dawn. A. Explain how this rhythmic behaviour is controlled in relation to seasonal changes throughout the year. Alright, let's get straight into it. The weta's behaviour is controlled by an endogenous rhythm or biological clock. This enables the weta to anticipate environmental events such as changes in light intensity, day or night. So the thing that gives away the fact that this is controlled by a biological clock is that they return to their resting place before dawn. So they're anticipating, they have some sort of knowledge or idea that it's going to be dawn soon. Alright, it's not that as soon as dawn comes up, they quickly scatter into the back into their resting places. They can anticipate, they have some understanding of what's about to happen. Alright, great, let's carry on. Alright, however, as the day lengths will change throughout the year, and because the underlying biological clock will not keep perfect time, the clock must be reset by exogenous cues known as zeitgebers. Okay, so this is where we're making that link, or we're explaining how it's controlled in terms of seasonal changes. So the problem is, if it was just under the control of this clock, as the season changes, the clock would be a little bit out of sync, or the clock might not keep perfect time, and after a while it might get out of sync anyway. Alright, so that's why we need these external cues or zeitgebers to help keep the time. Alright, the zeitgeber in this example is the change, probably the drop in light intensity. So as the light intensity starts to drop, that's going to be the cue that resets the clock. It could also be the increase in light intensity, but that's unlikely. The weta's unlikely to potentially even ever see that if it's already back hidden in a dark crevice before the sun comes up. Alright, anyway, this resets the clock, ensuring that the weta continues to emerge after sunset throughout the year. Alright, great. Let's move on to the next question. In a study of their rhythmic behaviour, weta were placed in constant conditions and their activity was recorded for 7 days. The data were plotted on an actogram. So we can see our thing down here, our actogram, and you can see for a start, the fact that they said in constant conditions, we know that this is an actogram, it's free running. Okay, it must be free running. Because we're in constant conditions, there's no zeitgebers. Okay, we also, however, notice that the activity is getting slightly earlier each day. Alright, so after 7 days, it's shifted slightly to the left. The period of activity is getting slightly earlier. Alright, so it's asked you now to calculate the period for this rhythm. Alright, and they mean the free running rhythm. Alright, so use the diagram in your calculation and show your working. Alright, well, for a start, if they were all perfectly in line, these periods of activity one after another, we can see at the top scale it would be a 24-hour period. So this is normally a daily rhythm, but when it's free running, it's going to be a little bit more or less than 24 hours. Okay, so we can see that the activity is getting earlier every day, so that tells us that the free running period is going to be slightly less than 24 hours. Alright, so how much less is it though? Well, if we look from one day to the next, it's going to be impossible to really measure that, and it may not be accurate. It might be a little bit different from one day to the next. But what we can do is we can measure how much earlier it's gotten over 7 days. Alright, so if you drop a ruler down from the first day, straight down, and then one coming on an angle to the start of the activity on the 7th day, you'll see that it's shifted to the left over 7 days, alright, by 3 hours or 180 minutes. Okay, so that's just a rough estimate there, and often for these they'll accept a range or they will make it clear. Okay, so after 7 days, the period is starting about 3 hours or 180 minutes earlier. Okay, so 180 minutes over 7 days, if we divide 180 by 7, it means it's getting earlier by about 27 minutes each day. Alright, and that means our free running period is 27 minutes less than 24 hours. All right, it's 27 minutes earlier each day. Our free running period is 24 hours minus 27 minutes. We've got 23 hours, 33 minutes. All right, okay, so this one doesn't seem to come up a heck of a lot, all right, but in principle it's actually relatively easy to do, okay. So it is in the notes. There is a good example there which shows you how to work out the free running period. Okay, so do jump on the website if you still don't quite get how to do this one. All right, let's move on to the last bit. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the wetter's nocturnal behaviour with respect to the wetter's survival. Now they've bolded "and", which tells us that for the merit, or probably maybe just the excellence, you probably need to explain advantages and disadvantages to actually get that grade. Okay, so you're going to need at least one of both. But let's start with the clear advantage, which is that it could reduce predation. So nocturnal behaviour can reduce the risk of predation. This is because many of the wetter's natural or potential predators are diurnal. They're active during the day, such as birds and lizards. Okay, so those things that are normally going to prey on the wetter might not be quite so active during the night. This increases the wetter's chance of survival to a reproductive age, and therefore the wetter will produce more offspring and have a greater reproductive success. Okay, so just linking it there to one of those key biological ideas of survival and reproductive success. All right, so what's a disadvantage? Well, it is, however, possible that the wetter will be at an increased risk of predation from nocturnal species. So there's still going to be some things that are active during the night, and the wetter is going to be more prone to predation from those things. Okay, so the tuatara and the possum and rats and stuff are examples of nocturnal species that will feed on the wetter. Now you don't need to know those, you didn't need to name those, just an extra side note there. However, there are probably fewer nocturnal predators than the potential diurnal predators. So we're saying, although we're going to have a reduced risk of predation during the day, slightly increased risk of predation during the night, but overall it's still going to be a good thing or work out in favour of the wetter. So nocturnal behaviour also reduces the risk of desiccation. Right, desiccation is a fancy word for drying out. Okay, so those of you who maybe did your internal on slaters will know that slaters are quite prone to drying out, to losing too much water, but wetters aren't going to have that problem so much because if they're coming out during the night, they're going to be exposed to a reduced light intensity and temperature. Alright, last but not least, the major disadvantage is that there may be less potential prey. Alright, so there's less predators, but there's often also less prey during the night. And that might reduce the wetter's potential food intake, resulting in less energy, which can be invested into reproduction. Or the wetter may have to search for food longer. Okay, and if you think about it, the day tends to be slightly longer than the night, so it also means the wetter has slightly less time, especially in summer when we have relatively short nights. All right, that's all the key ideas there. You probably didn't need all of those, but you definitely needed to clearly explain one advantage and one disadvantage. One little side note on the wetter before you go: if you're ever working in the garden and you cut open a large branch and it's hollow on the inside, if it's got a hollow that's big enough to kind of just fit your finger or your thumb into it, there may be a wetter living in there. Okay, so watch out in the garden when you're cutting through branches. Have a look and if it's got a bit of a hollow in it, have a look in there, see if you can find yourself a wetter. A very interesting and beautiful looking insect. Alright, let's move on to the next question.